There was a young woman in Israel who endured the pain of many infertile years, praying daily and yearning constantly for the precious moment of motherhood. Her own mother was upset that she never had the chance to become a grandmother prior to her passing. After 15 anxious years and some advanced fertility treatment, she was overjoyed to experience the deep-seated emotion as unique to an expectant mother. But it was the news which the doctor gave next that provided the real shock to the system. On account of her treatment, she had 5 viable fetuses inside her. Indeed, several months later, she gave birth to quintuplets. The delight of an instant family was immense, but the pressure and the financial strain couldn't be readily ignored. And yet still, the benevolence typical to Jewish people, and especially in close-knit communities and neighborhoods, ensured that meals were brought in, hand-me-down clothes and other necessities were provided. Everyone in the shchunah, in the neighborhood, happily offered whatever help they could, sharing in the thrill of this miracle. There was one particular woman from a neighboring community who sent in a check once a month. It wasn't a large amount, but it still provided much needed relief to the newly struggling family. And this young mother, she wanted to personally acknowledge and thank this woman, and so she got in touch and invited her to come visit herself and her brood. It was a sweet, elderly woman who was greeted at the door. Her face was seamed but still radiant, and her effervescent smile belied tears that had long since dried. She came into the modest apartment, was given a cup of tea and some cake, and these 2 generations forged an immediate kinship. And then at one point, the elderly woman was invited to come into the adjacent room to view some family photos, and then she fainted. Hatzalah, the emergency services were called, and she was soon revived. She refused to leave to the hospital and sat once again with the young mother. "That picture on the wall, who is that?" And the young woman replied, "That's my mother as a young girl." "Why?" The elderly woman went on, "I lost much of my family in the war, which is why I wanted to do my bit in helping another new family into this world. I had been consigned with 4 other girls to a particular barracks. We were not really religious, but it was the festival of Chanukkah, and we wanted to celebrate as we always did. We melted butter for oil. Threads from our rags were going to be used for wicks, and all we needed was to steal a few potato peels to serve as the menorah. We stole into the darkness of night to steal some potato peels from the garbage heap, but we were caught, questioned, harassed, and duly informed that we would be executed in the morning when the commandant was awake. There was one girl in the camp who was treated differently. She was multilingual, and the Germans used her to help translate radio broadcasts, especially as it was nearing the end of the war and they wanted to keep up with what was going on out there. We immediately realized our plight, and we knew that if anyone can help, however tiny that smidgen of hope, it was her. Maybe she could talk to someone, ask them to spare us. We came to her. We talked to her, and she told us, "Go away or you'll have me killed with you. Leave me alone." We pleaded with her. We cried, all to no avail. The next morning, the 5 of us were summoned from the barracks and were being led to our death. And then, as we were standing there awaiting our imminent fate, that girl came charging out into the muddy grounds, running up to the commandant and babbling away something to him, something about the Allied forces coming. He immediately releases us, screaming, chasing us away in rage and disgust, and goes running off himself. Until this day, we don't know exactly what it was that she said, nor do we ever have an opportunity to properly thank her. "That girl," said the old lady, the long-lost tears now back and streaming down her face. "That girl," she repeated, and then pointing to the picture, "that's the girl who saved our lives." And now it was the young mother's turn to become visibly shaken with emotion. She's trembling from head to toe, not just because she'd never been told about this heroic feat by her mother, not just because of the so-called coincidence, but because, as she explained, the night before I went into labor, I had a restless sleep. And then I saw my mother in my dream, clear, vivid, just as I remembered her before she passed on only a year before. She looked to me and she said, 5 for 5. I said, "Mama, what do you mean?" And she repeated, 5 for 5. And then I woke up. It meant nothing to me, nothing at all until now. Most of us can't begin to imagine the enormity of the risk and the incredible self-sacrifice that so many made in the camps just to be able to sustain their traditions, to kindle a makeshift menorah, to bring a little light into what was the darkest place on earth. Consider our tumultuous history, where there were pogroms, crusades, the Inquisition, and the Holocaust. There were those who constantly sought to obliterate us. But just as the darkest point of night is before the dawn, so too the brave and the faithful will always summon the strength and realize that the apparent darkness is just a prelude to an even greater light and illumination. The uniqueness of the fifth night of Hanukkah is that tonight is the first night that there is more light, more candles lit than not. It signifies the reality that good will always triumph over evil, that darkness will always prevail over light, and that all of our efforts, whether sacrifices we are prepared to make big or small, they'll always be repaid. It'll always come back on us in glorious ways, even generations later. Nothing is for nothing. 5 for 5. Happy Hanukkah.
Moment of Wisdom. Sub-brief and life-changing moments. Join us. Subscribe to Moment of Wisdom channels on YouTube, Telegram, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp.